Welcome to the Indie Pub, a laid-back interview show dedicated to the world of self and indie publishing. I'm your host, Jay Rushing, author of the self-published fantasy noir novel Radio, and a beverage buff with a passion for deep dives and good times. Every 2 weeks, a guest will step into the pub with a publishing-related topic and a favorite drink for us to explore and enjoy. Whether you want to sharpen your craft, snag a new cocktail recipe, or just have a laugh, there's always a seat and a full glass waiting for you at the Indie Pub. Welcome to the Indie Pub. Today's guest is author Krystle Matar, whose debut novel, The Legacy of the Brightwash, has been absolutely blowing up as of late and is currently a finalist for SPFBO this year. She's here with us to discuss the nitty-gritty of character complexity in fiction. But before we dive in, tell us a bit about what we're drinking here in the pub today.
Today we're drinking Bunnahabhain, which is a Scotch whiskey from Islay. It's an Islay Scotch, and it's really good. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, and I'm very excited to talk about Scotch complexity as well as character complexity.
And I have to ask, because I just did you know about the BH, or did you look up the BH?
I did know about the BH.
Oh, that's good. That's more than me.
Thank you, Duolingo.
Yeah, seriously. I love the Scotch episodes, but I'm always like, oh god, I need to look.
Yeah, I gotta double check how to pronounce this.
Yeah. That's great. All right, so go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, so like you said, my name is Krystle Matar. I only have the one novel out for now, Legacy of the Brightwash. Around writing, I farm and I parent, and I generally rough it out here in the old log cabin. And I think that's reflected in the stories that I write. Even though there's cities in it, a lot of the times the characters are living on the fringe of the cities, and there's quite a bit of survivalism and general wilderness at large, and it tends to be threatening. So I think you don't see that as much in the first book, but we're going to see a lot more of that in the series as it goes through. And I'm babbling, so I'm gonna
No, it's totally fine.
Leave it to you for the next question.
All right, so we'll dive into character complexity now.
Okay.
So when someone says a character is complex, what does that mean specifically to you?
It's about the layers, definitely, where they're not. It's like the difference between like a really simple nursery rhyme or a really simple song and something that has deep instrumental layers that you can hear new things every single time you listen to it. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with those simple things that stick in your head right away, but I'm a big fan of things that you read and you learn and you notice new things every time you go, like little quirks and little things that take you by surprise and things that are hard to define. And, you might have a character that's generally pretty strong, but he's got cracks in his armor, and those things are really interesting to me.
So along those lines, in your opinion, who are some of the best examples of truly complex characters that our listeners may recognize? And this could be books, movies, TV, just anything.
I'm really bad at keeping up with what other people might recognize. So my thinking was my best example is of complex characters comes from novels written by war veterans. And the one that comes to mind offhand is called Matterhorn by Karl Marlantes. He served in Vietnam. He was a Marine, and he wrote a novel, and it's a fictionalized experience, but it's still a very real story of what it's like, I would assume. And though novels like that, and Tim O'Brien is another author that comes to mind, the complexity there is staggering, and almost to a point where if we pulled some of this stuff in genre fiction, people would complain that our characters are inconsistent because they're 1 minute they're killing each other, the next minute they're dying for each other. But the best complex characters I've ever seen have always come out of veteran writing. They have an understanding, of of the opposing natures in each human in a way that I hope to mimic a sliver of that complexity.
Thinking about, I don't know, some of the more individual details when those characters really jump to life for you. Do you find that the details tend to fall into a few similar categories each time, or does it vary character to character?
That's a good question. I think what it is it is the ability to contradict ourselves. Where often what we believe we are isn't necessarily what other people believe we are, and also, how we think we'll act versus how we act when the chips are down. That to me is the sign of really complex characters, where if a character says they're going to do something and they do it, and it almost becomes unbelievable that they know themselves that well.
Yeah.
Whereas humans we're so messy, man. Like, there's no way you can look forward into a moment and know for sure how it's going to turn out. And the falling apart of those ideas that we have about ourselves, or where the really interesting stuff is for me, is how we fail to meet our own expectations. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and I feel like that's the humanizing aspect.
Yeah.
In fiction, really. Like, I mean, we all have our own individual successes, but we share lots of types of failures amongst each other.
Oh, definitely. Flaws aplenty, and the way those flaws interfere with our ability to do what we want, that's the good stuff. That's my jam.
Yeah. So when it comes to complex characters, that is one thing that has been mentioned over and over and over again about your book. And so when it comes to creating complex characters yourself, do you have specific strategies that you employ when you go about doing that work, or is it something that you just kind of let organically grow with each character?
Yeah, it's definitely, it wasn't something that I did on purpose. It's not something that I sought out. At least for me, a lot of these characters I've been writing about for a long time. So the worlds around them have changed a lot. They've jumped from different genres even, but the core of who they are has stayed with me a long time. So it gave me a lot of time to figure out what I wanted to write about and what they wanted to be. And all of that kind of came to fruition in this series, that it finally clicked together really well. But even that being said, a lot of new characters have come up to populate the world, and it's just, it's never a plan. It's usually just I put these guys on the page and they run away with the plot on me, and I'm just scrambling to keep up. But it's about letting them be flawed instead of going, okay, well, I need somebody to serve this purpose, and I hold them into that purpose. That always derails me and gets me into stuff that I don't like. But if I just let them be a hot fucking mess and blow up my whole plot, then that stuff is gold. So it's kind of trusting trusting that they will be complex if I give them time and space.
So thinking about that, when these opportunities for them to mess up come about, is it literally just you writing up to a point and then they have a decision to make, and then they make a decision and then you go from there? Or do you have some idea about how these decisions are going to steer?
Yeah. I look for the clues, right? Like, sometimes they'll drop a line somewhere and I'll go like, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that, my friend? and then I chase that idea down, and I can see where it's going to go, and I know it's going to be bad, and I know it's going to mess up with what I wanted, but it's so juicy that I can't let it go. And I not so much in the first book, but in the second book that I'm working on, all of the problems that I encountered and all the stuff that slowed me down was trying to stop that, trying to keep them on the track that I wanted, and I just hit dead ends. So I just had to trust that complexity would make a good story, and let them expand in the space instead of trying to keep the blinders on.
Okay, so what happens when you have two characters who have made decisions that are fouling up each other? Have you come across that yet? And if so, what's your strategy for getting out of that?
Well, I mean, that's life, right?
Yeah,
like,
seriously. Yeah.
So you don't get to erase the stupid shit that you said when you're drunk, like that. And that, I mean, not so much two characters, it's more my main character really fucked up the end of my own book on me. And so the whole second book is about him dealing with those consequences when he's supposed to be a main character moving the action. And it's hard to say exactly where he is now without spoiling the end of Brightwash, but some other characters have had to come into the spotlight to help move my story along for me, because fucking Toshway went and did something real stupid while he was drunk, and it kind of it took me a while to figure out how to fix that. So yeah, that is to say, it's not so much that they come into conflict with each other that fucks me up, it's when they come into conflict with me. Yeah.
Well, I like what you said there about basically one character's failure becomes another character's opportunity to shine.
Yes.
That's a really great strategy.
Yeah, that's accidental. I mean, he there was a point where while I was trying to write it, he was practically a MacGuffin, where it's like people were just trying to be in possession of him. He wasn't even moving the agency anymore. So what I had to do is let that lack of agency be his story. And that's where the complexity comes in, and how somebody who's used to having a lot of agency is going to deal with that. He's not doing good. He's having a rough time.
Yeah, in my own book, helplessness is a big theme, and it is really fascinating the number of nooks and crannies you can get into with that. Yeah, like it's so. It's such a complex emotion for people to have. That's a
and even
just
the idea of agency too is a complex idea, where it's like a lot of people shorthand agency for power, where it's like this person has the power to affect their lives and everyone's lives around them. But that's not the same thing. Sometimes agency is just the decision to get out of bed in the morning when everything's turned to shit. So, so it's, kind of making them reckon with a much lower level of agency than they're used to is really interesting too.
All right, let's jump back to our drink.
Okay.
So every episode, I like to talk about smell and taste, because they are the two most overlooked details in writing. And so with this whiskey, what is it that you're picking up? What are some of those notes, those flavors, those sensations that come out as you're drinking it?
The first one that took me by surprise is how sweet it is. And
yeah, especially for an Islay.
Yeah, and your episode with Clayton and Michael, they were talking about how, or Fletcher was talking about how he doesn't like Scotch whiskey because it's like licking an Irishman or a Scottishman's asshole, and I think he would like this one because it doesn't have that aggressive, peated, forward depth that turn some people off Scotch. It's quite caramelly at the front, like it's and then it becomes really hard to define after that, speaking of complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I agree with you. This does remind me a lot of an Irish whiskey in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
the sweetness and kind of that butter cookie type note.
Yeah,
a little bit.
It's really smooth, and it's really mellow compared to other Islay Scotch
I think
whiskey.
It's like a 46 or 47% or something like that.
Oh, let me see what mine says.
Oh, you got nice. You have it on hand. You're more prepared than me.
Yeah, 46.3.
Nice.
So yeah, it's not as aggressive as some of the other scotches that I've had in the recent past.
It's got like this. Maybe you can help me with this. There is a fruit on the nose, but I can't. Is it apricot? Is it pear? Is it apple? I can't.
It's almost citrusy, but not as acidic as a citrus. So it's like
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Where it's very hard to define, but it's a very festive fruit, whatever it is. Like,
you know what it is? I think I've got it. Those gummy orange slices, the like sugar coated ones. I think that's it.
Yeah, the sweet candy citrus rather than like candied orange peel or something, where all the acidity is gone and it's just sugar and yeah.
It's nice.
So it is really nice. I was surprised by it. That's not what I was expecting from an Islay. So
yeah,
it just goes to show that things are more complex than you give them credit for sometimes.
There's a few whiskeys I talk about all the time on this show just because they're my favorites and they're really fun. But as someone who appears to be quite the Islay fan, this one's technically not an Islay, but it is an island whiskey called Ledaig. Spelled Ledaig, Ledaig, but pronounced Ledaig.
Okay.
And it's weird. So it's Tobermory. It's their smoked whiskey.
Okay, so it's got that smoke.
Yeah, it's when you smell it, it smells exactly like barbecued brisket.
Oh,
like it's just meat in a glass, tasty meat, but it's hard to wrap your head around actually drinking it because you're like this would be great to chew. I'm not sure it would be great to sip. But then you get brave.
You just gotta pair it right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you drink it and it's a completely different whiskey. It's actually really kind of mellow and light. It's still smoky, but a completely different smoke.
Oh, that's interesting. So the here than it is.
Yep. And even the nose is very briny and salty and meaty. And then it's almost kind of like a light pear, fruity, really, really fun. If you're wanting to kind of mess with your head for an evening with a scotch, that's definitely one to try.
Yeah, definitely. I'm game. I'm going to bring that to my friends and watch.
You should, yeah.
Watch it blow their minds.
At least here, it's actually reasonable for a scotch. So I'm not sure what the prices are like in Canada, but...
I'll probably have to order it from the Whiskey Exchange.
Yeah.
I'm an equal opportunity whiskey drinker. The friend that I asked advice from, she is very monogamous with her Islay whiskeys. But I am a whiskey slut. Like I've got a Canadian rye here. I've got I always buy Writer's Tears just because it's the good joke, right?
Yeah, of course.
And we've got a couple of Canadian ryes that we really like, and I just can't have corn. So even though I like a good dirty bourbon, I can't. So Scotch is the safe one where I know for sure I'm not going to have a problem with it. But I mean, booze is booze, man.
Like, I'm the same way. I definitely have the ones I prefer and the ones I don't. But
and there's the easy drinkers and then there's the deep thinkers. You know, like there's
for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. I don't want to think about this, so I'll bring the sweet one, or I'm gonna sit and have a half ounce just because I earned it, but it's gonna be good.
Yeah. For sure. So what are you getting on the palate for this one?
Okay. Well, that's where the sweetness really lives, and then after that, that's where it gets so hard to define because it's like I want to say acidic, but it's not, and I want to say sharp, but it's not. There's like a coppery. Yeah. Maybe. It's
a little tingly, but smooth. It's like it's the like a soft drink. Like it's that pleasurable tingle.
a little bit of pleasant mouth pain. But that doesn't sound very appealing. So like I don't know. But yeah.
A little woody, I would say.
Yeah, you definitely taste the cask in it, like, because it has that earthy character to it, but not heavily. So it's like it doesn't want to be defined. It just wants to vibe with you.
For sure. Yeah, I feel like it's either a complete just like headphones on, close your eyes, mellow out, or it's one you stare at it and ponder. What? Yeah. What is inside of you? What makes you tick type whiskey?
It's dangerous too because you're trying to define it, you drink a little bit too much.
Yep.
Because you're going back, going like, what is that flavor? And then all of a sudden your glass is empty.
Yeah. I gave myself a pretty generous pour for the episode, so I guess I have plenty of opportunity to.
Well, I've got my bottle on hand, so I'll probably go back for more. But yeah, that's a good one. That's a keeper. Thank you. Shout out to Sarah from Fiction Fans Podcast for suggesting that one to me.
Nice. Yeah, I'm happy. I was looking for some new bottles, so this was a very nice addition to the collection.
I love an excuse to buy a new whiskey.
Yeah. I recently just found this website in Germany that has pretty decent prices, and I live like 10 miles from the border, so it's not too hard to get at that stuff. So yeah. So that was pretty good. All right, let's get back to our characters. I'm sure we'll talk whiskey a lot towards the end. So when you are looking at your characters, I know you talked a bit about letting their decisions and mistakes kind of drive their complexity. But do you have a way where you determine who gets to be more or less complex and whether or not a certain character should or shouldn't end up complex? Yeah,
I made some of those conscious choices through Brightwash where it's a big book and it's got a big cast, but no matter the size of the book, every character that you give has weight. Like the reader is carrying some weight with them, and they got to keep up with you. So you can't load them down too much, or you're going to leave them behind. So when you have this cast, you have to decide who gets to be a heavy character that makes the reader think, and who do you let be light so that the reader can carry them along without having to think about it too much. So certainly the level of importance of a character, whether they're complex or not, in the background isn't my decision so much as whether or not I'm going to explore it and let them steal the show. So some characters, I just have to shut them down. I'm like, no, I don't have time for you, man. Like I'm moving, and you're not on this party with me. But then there were also some characters who were villains that someone mentioned that it just the guy just felt so not flat, but just like predictably awful. And it's like, yeah, he should be predictably awful because he's awful. Like, it's okay. Like some people, are just really, really awful, and that's life, So I think sometimes you can let your characters just be giant piles of cow shit, Like, you don't have to overthink every single little nuance of a villain. And a complex villain is a great thing, but some people are just awful.
Yeah.
So it was nice to have a couple of guys there that were kind of incompetent and kind of shitty, and just there was no depth to them. They were just surface level awful, and it was okay. And it helped the weight balance in a way that the other people who were more important and more interesting had room to be heavy, and take up a lot of room without overloading the entire book. And it's not a small book, and I'm very aware of the fact that I'm asking readers for a lot, but it seems to have worked, so I'm not going to question it too much.
Real quickly, talk a little bit more about your concept of character heaviness and weight. I'm really interested in that. And you mentioned a little bit, but so you're thinking about the weight the reader is carrying.
Yeah.
But are you also, is that also the weight that they take up, the kind of their gravity within the story and things like
exactly.
that?
Yeah,
okay.
both of those, absolutely. So it's like the reader comes to page 1 carrying nothing. They don't know you, they don't know your world, you don't know your people if it's a first book. And you're putting things in their hands, and they gotta hold it all with them and follow you along. And if you put too much on them, then that's where you get readers who say that they never felt like they knew what was going on, and they never knew who was who, and it's because you've asked them to carry too much too fast. And so, but that weight is determined by the size of the story and, your world building and your characters. And it's like all the information that you hand to people is something that they got to hold on to, where it's like, you've made this rope for them to follow, but they got to braid it behind you as you go.
Yeah. Right.
So if you've got too much, then they can't keep up, and they're getting snags, and they don't know who this guy is, even though you mentioned him 60 pages ago. And so you have to kind of decide where the important stuff is and cut away extra weight so that stuff really shines, and so that you can feed them small pieces at a time and make them feel like it's a really big world without generally overloading them. And the only way that I was able to figure out where all the weight was by reading my own book about 1 million times. So, but it's just like this. If a book is something that person is carrying, then you can't give too much weight. And in that, if side characters are coming in and you're giving them too much weight, you're kind of promising that they're going to be important. So the people are trying to remember the stuff that you're giving them. And then if that person never comes up again, then it's just like it's like a loose thread that they tried to put in, and it's just hanging out. And so you gotta be mindful of how important you're promising these characters are going to be as you go.
Along those lines, are there certain characters that benefit from being more complex, or maybe benefit from being less complex? And if so, how would you determine that?
Yeah, I think that comes down to what kind of story you're trying to tell. So if it's meant to be, it all comes down to what you're trying to say about the people in your story. If you're meant to tell a story that's kind of straightforward and a little bit, it's got cleaner edges to it, then I think those are the stories that tend to drop the complexity. But it's okay, because they're not going for that. Like it's meant to be a cleaner picture, whereas complexity in my mind tends to equal messiness. And so if you're telling a story about a bunch of people that are kind of a hot mess, then it's going to be muddier, and there's going to be a lot more feedback loops and stuff where, things aren't clear, and that's where the complex characters really shine. But it's in the service of the story rather than the character, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. That makes total sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. So what aspects of an individual character do you think are the best places to start growing their complexity?
Like as a writer while you're planning, or as a writer while you're telling the story?
Could be either. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about how mistakes and decision making is a really great place to grow that complexity. But
Yeah.
are there other, you know, aspects of a character like backstory or physical features or whatnot that you would find to be good places to kind of let that complexity build?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So definitely when a character walks into the story and they interest me and I know they're going to be trouble, I tend to take a day or two. I just kind of pause where I was and take a minute and figure out where they came from, because, you know, where they came from is going to inform where they're going, and why. And the whys are probably where I get most of the best ideas. It's like, okay, why are you here? Why aren't you somewhere else? Why are you doing this? Why did you do that stupid thing? And it's like chasing that why leads you back through some really, really interesting layers. And that doesn't make it onto the page, but knowing that, it lets the complexity bleed through, where it's like, okay, so now I know why he's doing that, and maybe he'll never ever mention it, but I know and he knows, and we're going to go forward now. So yeah, usually when somebody comes and takes me by surprise, I have to take a minute to figure out what they're up to. Yeah, and figure out where they came from and figure out what they're looking for, because knowing why they're moving in this direction will help me know where they're going to fall apart.
Yeah, I am completely with you on that. I think that kind of chasing the whys really helps you kind of make sure everything, the chain stays connected, right? Like everything follows logically from where they were, what they've done, what they thought, and it helps the next
so that
moves feel natural, right?
If they zig, it makes sense.
Exactly. Yes.
Because, you know, if you don't know why they took that hard turn, then it feels a little bit disoriented and it makes it feel like they're inconsistent. But people are consistently inconsistent because of the whys that are chasing them. So if you know what they are, then you can build it in such a way that after they've turned, the reader can go, oh, yeah, okay, I see why.
Yeah, I almost wonder if some of that isn't just being able to write from a place of more confidence, you know, as the author, like you're certain that this is the move they're going to make because you know who they are, where they come from, and so when you put that onto the page, the reader's kind of picking up that they can trust you with it. Like, of course, this is what they'll do because there's just a swagger or vibe to what we're writing with that. Yeah,
it's like offering a contract. Like, I know this doesn't make sense right now, but trust me.
For sure,
I'm going to lead you through this, and you're going to understand by the time we get to the end. But if you don't know, then I think they can feel that.
So speaking of that trust and the contract with the reader, can you think of any examples of character complexity gone wrong? Like when a character just really went off the rails, and why? Like, what were some of the things that made you throw your hands up and say, yeah, I can't follow that?
That's a good question. I think probably the most famous one right now is the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones. Yeah. The first few seasons, they offered us a lot of contracts, and then went, yeah, never mind. We're going to do this other thing instead. And almost across the entire cast of that show, I didn't even watch the last season because it's like, I don't know, they lost me. Because the contracts were falling apart, and you could feel it, and you could feel that they were going to betray the things. And it's not clever, you know, like just because somebody has guessed the ending doesn't mean it's a bad ending. If they've guessed it, then it means that it makes sense, you know? So they zigged and they zagged in a couple of weird ways, and it felt like they were just tossing out the contracts because too many people had picked up on them or something. I don't know.
No, for sure. I one that comes to mind for me is Penny Dreadful.
Okay.
The first series of it, it was, you know, the first season, I pour it straight into my eyeballs. Like, I couldn't get enough. It was really into
I remember that.
And then the second season, I was like, oh, okay, Sure, I'll go with you. Fine. And then the third season, it was just
the contracts fell apart.
a lot of long size episodes.
I don't even see. That's probably a really good example because I don't remember there being more than one season of that show, totally. And I really liked the first season, but I don't know. Maybe they lost me so quickly that I forgot it existed.
No, so, you're not missing much, especially in that last third season.
Good to know.
No need to catch up. Okay, so another character question.
Okay.
Do you think that there's a difference between a character that's described as complex versus being described as complicated? And if so, what do you think those differences are? And if so, do you think one is better than the other, or do they hold equal value?
Well, I think that comes down to the difference between a character and a person, I think, where people are complicated, period. Kind of end of it. Mm-hmm. But does it always make a good story? I don't know. So there has to be some give and take between the reality of how complicated people are versus what feels like a satisfying story arc. And sometimes people are so complicated that it prevents them from growing. Whereas a character, people want to see a growth arc, or the opposite of a growth arc, whatever that's called.
Yeah.
So it feels like complicated can sometimes undercut complexity, because fiction isn't always the way things really are. Because some people can go on being complicated for 50 years, but they never really change in that complicatedness. Whereas complexity is like a layer that allows for growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. I almost wonder if it's like there's more contradiction in complexity versus complication just being more of a confused state, or more of a just like more moving parts, maybe. I don't know. The more complicated you make an engine, right, the harder it is to repair. And so I think characters are a similar thing, where it's like when you're crafting a story, there's a point where being too complicated interferes with the smooth moving of your engine. Mm-hmm. And us as living humans, it's okay because we're here, we're living our lives, we're doing whatever. But when you have 3 acts to tell their story, you got to kind of truncate some of that stuff and make it consistent enough that even if they zig and zag, it's making sense. Whereas we contradict ourselves too much to sometimes it never makes sense. And totally. We're standing in the wreckage of everything we thought our lives would be, and it's a crappy story. Right? So I think that might be the difference in my head. Just it's a storytelling angle. Sure. Yeah. Okay, back to our drink.
Okay.
If you're willing, I'd like for you to do a little bit of world building for us. Can you create the perfect setting for this drink? The right mood, think maybe the right pairings to go with it, the right location. Like if you had to build just a one scene world for you and this drink
that's tricky for me. Because I usually associate whiskey with writing. It's my I'm frustrated and need a drink, or I did really well and I need a drink when I'm writing. But I think this particular whiskey would lend itself really well to camping and a bonfire, and the sweetness and the way it defies being defined would lend itself well to sitting outside, and it's so cold that you can kind of taste the air, and then but the whiskey's nice and warm and mellow, and you can smell the campfire, and people are roasting sweet things like marshmallows and stuff to kind of complement that complex burnt sugar flavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's an easy drinker, so whoops, the bottle's gone. and your friends are going to camp on your property with you for the night because they can't drive. So that's what that makes me think of, is just kind of sharing with people. It's not a solitary whiskey. This one wants to be shared.
Yeah. Speaking of friends and camping, I had some friends recently enlighten me to the wonders that is using a Reese's peanut butter cup instead of chocolate in a s'more.
Oh shit. Okay.
Oh yeah. Next time you happen to be making s'mores, as we all do on a daily basis, you have to have a Reese's peanut butter cup around. Grab it because it's phenomenal. If you're a peanut butter person.
Yeah, that's a big if. That's a big caveat. But yeah, that sounds like something my friend Amy would really like. I think I'll have to make some of that for her.
Nice. All right, so character complexity can be built both by information the reader gets about a certain character and also deliberate lack of information, the stuff we hold back from them.
Yeah.
Do you prefer to get all that information out and let the complexity kind of live out in the open? Or do you like to have the mystery be the complexity? Or do you like a healthy mix of both? And regardless, how do you go about making this decision of where that information lives?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm definitely a character writer where some people have said that the plot of Brightwash is literally just the characters crashing into each other. Just because their relationships and their failed relationships and, all of that drives everything that goes wrong. So with that in mind, I'm a big fan of laying out as many cards as my word count can fit, where it's like this relationship and this relationship, and I don't mean romantic relationship, but like friendship, family, like all of it. All of that informs how things fall apart. And so you need as much as you can to justify that falling apart. But of course, it's a tightrope. Like, if you spend too much time talking about their backstory, then why didn't you just write that story, right? Yeah. So it's but that works for me because I'm a character writer. If I was writing a different story where the plot was more event focused, I don't think I would spend as much time laying out those complexities, because it's like if the plot's got to move, then you don't have as much time for that kind of stuff. So that entirely depends on, again, what kind of story you're trying to tell.
And so you brought up relationships just there, and when it comes to characters, that makes me think conflict. So when you're using conflict as a part of your character's complexity, do you tend to favor internal or external conflict, or a balance, and how do you use those differently?
Oh, hella both. Yeah, because it's like what someone will put up with from a random stranger in the streets is very different from what they'll put up with from their spouse or their child or their sibling. And in fact, somebody made a comment about how Joshua seems to have higher standards for his own son than he does for the average citizen, because he wanted a certain life for his son, and his son did not agree. So I think the internal drives the external, because how we feel about the people around us and the world around us is going to drive how we react, and the reacting is what drives the big external conflicts, right? Because if we take things in stride, that's something that comes from us, where it's like we are good at processing problems, and we can adjust really quickly, and so And so we're able to minimize conflict around us. Whereas if we're a mess on the inside and we can't handle this shit, and you fall apart, you know, walking down the street, that's going to drive a lot of conflict. So I would say that I prioritize the internal to get the most out of the external.
Gotcha. So again, that probably then comes back to that contract you're writing with your readers, right? Like making sure that internal conflict is known enough to.
Oh yeah, because like if they make a decision and somebody gets killed, you're gonna want to know why they made that bad decision, and so you've got to lay that groundwork of the internal conflict, dialogue, problem, whatever. You've got to lay that out so that it's hard to talk about it without spoilers. But when somebody gets killed, we know how Toshway got there because we watched him agonize over that choice, and we continue to watch him fall apart after. And that continuing of the falling apart is driven entirely by the internal, but it creates massive external consequences.
All right, so if you were approached by a young up-and-coming author who really, really, really was trying to get their characters more complex, what would be some advice you would give them on where to start, how to go about doing that?
Yeah. I think the first biggest one is definitely chase the whys and spend some time asking your characters why. But also, something that I used to do when I had more time on my hands was when we go places in the world and we hear people talking around us, you kind of eavesdrop a little and people watch a little. And I used to, not on purpose, just my story writing brain used to kind of try to imagine their whys a little bit. Like how did they get there? Why are they standing in the downtown square arguing with each other? Like what brought them here, and why are they okay with this behavior? And it just kind of like you apply these thought experiments to real situations, and it helps you think up really, really good stuff for your imaginary situations.
Yeah, for sure.
So definitely chasing the whys is the first one that I tell people when they're trying to figure out their characters. And also be patient with it and let them take their time to tell you their stories, because some of them try to hold their cards a little closer to the vest and it's hard to see what they're up to. But if you just kind of trust your instincts as a storyteller and trust the process, then you can unfold. And it's okay if it's slow. Like, we always make it sound like it's such a rush thing that you got to do. You got to hurry up and publish, and you got to do this so you can accomplish these things. But I'm a fan of slow cooking and slow writing and slow drinking, because it's like you got to give that stuff time. We aged the Scotch a few years because it develops complexity.
Absolutely.
So just time, be patient with the process, and trust that it's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to be good if you give it time.
Okay, what aspects of character complexity would you like to see used more in fiction?
Flaws. Yeah. And it's something that I really appreciate the Grimdark movement for, because they let their characters be flawed deeply. And I feel like it's more honest in a way. I'm not a big fan of the stories where the main character is really shiny and never makes any mistakes and just generally always does the right thing, because it's like, I don't know, maybe it's me, maybe I'm a mess, but I can't relate to that. I don't know what that feels like, you know.
I'm
like,
with you on that, yeah.
You know, yeah, and it's like, and I just want people to let their characters be really deeply flawed, and it's okay if it's ugly, because we've all got it. We've all got the darkness, you know, and conquering that means so much more than a character who is light and easy and right all the time, consistently being that way. But if you've got those characters with that deep dark ugliness and they overcome it, like, that's a victory. That's something to celebrate. Whereas, you know, just I don't know, I just don't like it when it's too easy.
So, okay, speaking of that pet peeve, are there any other character complexity pet peeves that you have that you see in a book and you're just like, it doesn't really work for me?
I think it's mistaking complexity for complicated. That one, circling back, where it's like the character makes so many choices that seem to contradict the world building and the character building that it stops making sense, where it's like it just feels like some people try to throw in too many curveballs and they didn't lay the groundwork out enough, and that always pulls me out really fast, where it's like, I don't really believe in this that you're trying to sell me, and I don't think you believe in it either, so I'm out. I'm gonna tap out now.
Yeah. I hear you. It just doesn't have the scaffolding to support it, right?
Exactly, the scaffolding. That's perfect. That's a perfect analogy.
All right, Krystle, it is last call here in the Indie Pub. Can you give us an indie published book or two or three or more that you think people should check out?
Well, I always want people to check out Angela Boord's writing. She is fantastic, and she's doing amazing things. Her book, Fortune's Fool, was the SPIFBO runner-up 2 years ago, I guess, SPIFBO 5. And talk about complex characters. Kira is a beautiful hot mess, and I want more people to love her. So definitely Angela Boord. Now I got to think faster because I don't have my books out.
That's right.
I'm a big fan of Clayton and Michael's book, NORYLSKA GROANS. I was fortunate enough to beta read that bad boy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating study in what makes us who we are and what happens to who we are if we start taking some of that stuff away. So talk about complexity. It's like, it's so complex that they start fucking around with the layers and letting the people kind of really fall apart without some of the key aspects of who they used to be, or kind of getting stronger without some of those key aspects. So that's a really good character study, but it's also a bloodbath, so not for the faint of heart. So I think those would be two very opposing but very strong recommendations, where if you want something more romantic and a little bit lighter, Angela Boord is where to go. But if you don't flinch easy, then NORYLSKA GROANS is a fantastic character study.
All right, same question, but for any other media, indie or not.
Oh, shit. You know what I really like, and something that drove a lot of my writing, is UK crime dramas and police procedurals. For example, there's one based in Wales called Hinterland. It's really good. There's one in Scotland called Shetland that's really good. There's a Victorian one called Ripper Street that is fucking excellent. And I find those types of police procedurals are really good character studies as well, where unlike American cop shows, there's very little fighting, very little, I don't want to say little action, but there's not very many car chases, not very many explosions, and not very much science either. It's very much the detectives just kind of figuring it out based on the character of the people that they find in their investigations. So those shows are really good at just unreeling just enough of the information to keep you wondering what's going to happen, but by the time they get to the end, it's like, yeah, this is how it had to be. And it's really good. The shows that I listed, I found are really good for that kind of complexity that's consistent enough to be believable, where it makes sense even though you didn't see it coming.
All right, Krystle, tell our listeners what you have going on and where they can find you and your work.
Mostly I'm on Twitter. That's my big platform. So just at Krystle Matar. I also have a website, KrystleMatar.com. I'm on Instagram a bit, but not very much. Again, at Krystle Matar. I'm really cashing in on the weird name. Right now I'm working on Legacy of Brick and Bone. So that's the sequel to Legacy of the Brightwash. And it's going very well, and I've locked down all my complex assholes, and there's no turning back. So that should be passed off to editors pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to getting that going. I also have a short story in an anthology coming out that's been spearheaded by Virginia McLean, who's an absolute powerhouse in the indie world. We're looking at getting some advertising going for that in January or maybe February, which is coming up really soon, and I'm excited. For anyone that's read Brightwash, that short story is from Ishmael's point of view. So I think he's got a lot of fans. People are looking forward for more from him. And then I got all kinds of stories that I want to tell, so hopefully there's a lot coming out from me in the next year or two where people can't keep up with me.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Indie Pub. If you like what you hear, consider giving us a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our indie investigations or boozy banter. I've been your host, Jay Rushing, and we'll see you back in the pub next time.